This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, lcsw-c. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, lcsw-c.
Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Tammy Nelson. Tammy, thank you so much for being my guest on Therapy Chat today.
Thank you for welcoming me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited. I've been really looking forward to speaking with you ever since we connected. Originally, earlier this year, we were going to try to do it at the Psychotherapy Networker, but because I had a family emergency, we couldn't make that happen. But I'm really interested in a particular aspect of your work, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with couples and relationship therapy. So that's like, ooh, really interesting. So before we get into it, though, can you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a licensed and certified sex and couples therapist, and I've been doing it for, I hate to age myself, but probably 35 years. And I see couples and individuals. I still have a pretty full practice. I do intensives for couples, and I also do retreats with ketamine, without ketamine for couples. And I do retreats for therapists who are trying to write a book, which that's like my side love. And I'm the author of 6 books. The most recent one is Open Monogamy, which is a guide to co-creating your ideal relationship agreement. For therapists in particular, I wrote Integrative Sex and Couples Therapy, which also has chapters by other integrative sex therapists that are in the field focused on specific issues. So that might be of interest. I'm the host of the podcast, The Trouble with Sex, and I have a TEDx talk on relationships, and I live in Los Angeles.
Beautiful. And that's all so very interesting. I didn't know until today that you had a podcast, so I'm definitely going to check that out. But now when you say about retreats for therapists who want to write books, I'm like, hey, I might be contacting you about that because I'm in the process of a proposal. I'm like, I know, I need this space to really focus. I'm in a writing group, but I need I'm going to need the ongoing space to focus on writing. And it's something where you have to get into that creative energy sometimes by going away from your normal life, it seems.
I think you're absolutely right. And, I think that's the sort of idea about retreats as well. Like, just being in a retreat, like being out of your normal routine, whether it's to write a book or to focus on your relationship. There is something, sort of self-perpetuating about that, where you think, all right, I have this much time, there's a beginning, middle, and an end, and my intention plays a huge part in that. Like what I intend to get out of it is contributing to the value of what I'm putting there. So there is something to be said for that. I think it's hard just like it's hard to write a book focusing on an hour a day. At least it's hard for me. I mean, I've written 6 books. I don't think I did any of them by writing an hour a day, but that might be somebody else's style. I think it's also hard to focus on your relationship by, just saying, well, we have dinner every night. Or, I sit next to my partner on the couch watching TV every night, which is frankly me. There's a lot of good TV on, and it's a great way to decompress after seeing people all day. But the idea of sort of setting aside focused time for anything that you want to make a huge change in, whether it's like a yoga retreat or meditation or anything that you really want to focus on, I think, has a lot of power in it.
Yeah, I'm interested if maybe you would say something about like this might be kind of a cliche question, but what would people, I don't know, I'm thinking of what type of change people could expect or seek through the process of an integrative sex therapy retreat. That's the integrative part is new, and I think a lot of people new in terms of my mind, integrative sex therapy, and then a lot of people really don't even know what sex therapy is or what happens there. I think they have like a maybe porn influenced idea of what it would be that's, I'm sure, not very accurate at all.
Well, that's the advanced retreat. My retreats, like we keep our clothes on, but at least in the retreat center where everyone else is located, you do have exercises that you're assigned to do in your room with your partner or partners, or by yourself if you're there by yourself. But there's a couple questions in there. Sex therapy really is based on sort of a cognitive behavioral understanding of your sexual life. So, eroticism is the part of us that makes us feel alive. It makes us feel passionate. It makes us feel in love. It makes us feel young. It makes us, feel like the companionship part of our relationship is not as stressful. We could put up with a lot if we're having good sex. But we also don't focus on having good sex as a goal. We focus on it sometimes as an expectation, like this should just happen and we shouldn't have to talk about it. And we shouldn't have to change the way we have sex. And we should only, have good sex if we look good and if our hormones are raging and if we're young and if we're, there's certain heteronormative sort of goalposts that we believe that if we meet, then sex is good. So we don't really teach people that you have to work as much on your erotic life as you do on your companionship, your day-to-day roommate life. So going to a sex therapist really is, it serves a couple different purposes. One, it can be for those people who are trying to sort of reboot the desire in their lives, in themselves, or for their partner, or in their relationships. Or it can be to work on arousal issues, which tend to be in your body, right? Desires in your head and arousals in your body. So things like erectile issues or orgasmic issues, or, anything that is interfering with your capacity to have sex. And then the third area is really like the relational issues, like what is preventing us from having the sex that we want, or the desire for sex, or the desire for something. And that has to do also with pleasure. Like, what does pleasure really mean? And do we have a lot of guilt and shame around pleasure? And do we just put, work as the priority? And when we're done with work, maybe we can have some pleasure on the weekend, but then we're going to have a hangover afterwards and have to pay for it. So all of that can be part of sex therapy. When I talk about the integrative part, the way that I do couples therapy is I created integrative relationship therapy. So integrative relationship therapy means that you integrate always the sex part, because you can't really do couples therapy without sex therapy. I don't know how people do that. I don't know how people do, relationship counseling without talking about sex, unless you're working from a work coaching perspective. And even then you talk about sex. So it integrates the sexual piece into relationships, and it also integrates the body, some spiritual pieces, what's the meaning of the relationship? What's the narrative that you make up about why you're here, why you're together? Does it feel like you have a broader mission in the world, as a couple versus as an individual? Do you believe that there's some kind of magic that brought you together? And we talk about partner selection and how we're here to help each other grow up from our childhoods. And we try to integrate all those things. We integrate like parts work and attachment. There's some neuroscience in it, but the idea is, and then I'll let you ask more questions because I know I'm answering this in very long
I
answer.
love it. Don't worry. You're perfect.
It really, integrative relationship therapy has certain goals to hit. So everyone comes in some kind of crisis, right? It's like a discovery process, like something that they discover that they didn't know about, or their narrative is in crisis. And then the next phase of the therapy is really the insight where people grieve their narrative. Like, I thought we would stay sexual forever, or I thought I would always be hot for you, or I thought I would stay healthy and we would have this particular kind of sex for forever, or I thought it would always be pleasurable, or whatever the grief is. You have to sort of understand what your narrative is and then grieve it, because if you want to go into the third phase, which is the vision, like creating a new narrative going forward, you have to know what you have to let go of. Because a lot of the pain in a relationship is holding on to a story that you have about how it's supposed to be. And the closer you can get to understanding that story, the more likely you are to be able to let go of the things that really aren't working. And if you can do that, then you can create a relationship that could actually work for you in this moment, in this time, in this body, with this set of circumstances. So those are really the phases that we try to integrate into the relationship therapy.
Wow. I'm so glad we're talking about this. That is beautiful. And just to be really clear, so everyone hears, that's the method you created, right? Integrative Relationship Therapy.
Yes. And you can buy the course through PESI, Integrative Relationship Therapy. You could be certified. And I'm just being
facetious. There will be a link in the show notes, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah, no, I'm being facetious, but there really is I think it's 35 hours where I really do dig into integrative relationship therapy. So you can apply it to trauma. You can apply it to affairs, to sexuality, to open relationships, to things that are really contemporary that people actually need help with, that therapists need help with. Like it's all good in the speaking, like, okay, people have attachment issues. Now what do I do with them in the room when
right.
they go, my partner doesn't want to have sex with me? Well, okay. That's not an attachment wound. If your partner doesn't want to have sex with you, it's not necessarily an attachment wound. It could be a lot of different combination of things. And so we integrate all of those skills to be able to work on that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for, you got my wheels turning so much while you were talking. There's so many things about, I'm pretty hung up lately on how puritanical our U.S. culture is and how, I'm always pretty critical of patriarchal structures, but lately I'm just really kind of just fed up with it. Like just not, not having it anymore. And, I think the political, situation has a lot to do with that, where, I don't feel like I can hold back from saying, hey, these attitudes about sexuality, expression of our sexual identity, our gender expression, all of those, and empowerment of women, is, and all marginalized groups is just, this is not a drill. And, but in my individual practice as a therapist, and I specialize in survivors of developmental trauma. So any childhood, abuse, attachment injuries, loss, and sexual trauma is one of my specific areas of focus. In my work for 22 years, I've been working with survivors of sexual trauma. So, I see so often how culture and trauma and shame around sex just interferes with access to our being and who we are. So when you said that eroticism is, well, I thought I wrote it down, but I got the impression that you were saying that eroticism is kind of, part of our being as a human, and thinking about childhood development and all of the shame around talking about sex and how early we can detach from that aspect of our being, and how harmful that could be throughout the lifespan in understanding who we are and relating with others. And also what you said about the shame connected with pleasure, not just sexual pleasure, but just pleasure, like joy. Having fun is, in the puritanical view, that's lazy. Fun? No, you're here to work. That's it. Work. And work brings you closer to divinity, and it's like, you can see how that plays out now in our culture, and how, working with a lot of people in middle age, how the medical model says, oh, if you're having erectile issues, that's just a common thing for men when they get to their 40s, and take a medicine. So then it says, override what your body is telling you and just mechanically make it possible to have penetrative intercourse. Whereas for those of us socialized as female and those with vaginas, it's like you learn, especially in my generation, I'm in my 50s, sex is vaginal penetrative intercourse where the man has an orgasm. That's what sex is. And that's not, we know that's not what sex is. That's not the complete example of what sex is. But those limited constructs are so powerful in influencing the way we see everything.
Yeah. And it also implies that pleasure is for the privileged only, right? Because it means that if you have to work hard to deserve pleasure, for when you have a weekend off or a holiday, or if you work hard enough, maybe you can get some pleasure in the evening.
Earn it.
You can earn it. Then it really is about people who are privileged enough to have the time, the energy, the helicopters, the household help. Like, we have this patriarchal sort of pyramid model that the people at the top not only have the most resources, but the most pleasure. So they have the most access to pleasure and the most opportunity. And so it implies that the people at the bottom that are working the hardest to get to the resources have the least amount of time and the least amount of access to pleasure. And that's really the way to keep the masses working, right? Like, there's a payoff at the top, whether it's like food or sex or relationships or sleep or whatever it is. That has become the axis that people are viewing pleasure, instead of pleasure is our power. Pleasure is the principle that we're all born with access to. And that's how we perpetuate the species. And if we recognize that, pleasure is a birthright, first of all, women would take over the planet if we figured that out. And
that's why they don't want us to know.
And that's why it's become a privilege, right? It's a restriction, because it has so much power. It has so much power to come from that place. And so anything that's restricted and held as something that somebody has to dole out, for sure. We know there's a secret there. Like, what is that? What are they trying to put in a pill? And like you said, there's a sort of heteronormative view of what sex should be and what pleasure should be. And the reality is that majority of people don't fit into that way of having sex, or they have expanded their way of having sex. And if we look at sex, not just as sexual function but pleasure, then we can look at people who struggle as being pleasure avoidant. Like, what is it that you are denying in your life around pleasure? Is it because you want to control your own urge for pleasure because of shame and guilt, and it makes me a good girl, and I'm a good Catholic, like whatever the narrative is around, if I control my urges for pleasure, if I deny it, then I'm strong. If I don't eat that cookie, then I'm really in control of myself, even though it would be pleasurable. If I don't do it, I feel better. Or if it's pleasure avoidance, it's really around the relationship. It becomes transactional. So I'll have sex with you if, or I won't have sex with you because, or if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to go have sex with someone else, or I'm going to leave you, or, sex becomes the transactional part. The pleasure becomes now the thing that we have to use to control the relationship. Maybe it's the only thing I feel like I have power over.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last part, which is really the part you and I are talking about, is pleasure rejection. So I might really like pleasure and it might feel great in my body, but then my body rejects it. There's a story that my body's holding on to that it says I can't do it. I'll decide how this is going to go. I'll rewrite my whole experience of pleasure. And right now, I'm going to be in charge of it and say, no, you're not going to touch me there. I'm not going to relax. Maybe I'll just dissociate and let you do it, but I'm not going to feel the pleasure. It's really a way of rejecting the experience of pleasure because there's been trauma.
Yeah.
And it's your body trying to rewrite the history of that neurological pathway in your body. It's not just in your brain. I've tried to change my language around that. Like I've been talking about this deer path in the woods in your brain, this sort of neurological pathway that we try to change we try to override it with a pleasurable experience so that the trauma experience can be different. But I almost feel like it's not just a neurological path in your brain, but it's a path in your whole body. Like your whole body is your brain here when it comes to the trauma experience. So you're trying to rewrite the whole sort of energetic experience. Your body's saying, no, I don't, I'll be in charge of who starts, who stops, what happens, who touches me, what I think about. I'll be in charge of what I find pleasurable. And maybe I don't find any of it pleasurable. Maybe what I find most helpful in this moment is to kick you out of bed. That actually will rewrite a neurological pathway for me. The problem is, integrating that. Like, how do you work with that on an integrative level? Like, where do you put that narrative? How do we fit that into our relationship?
This is so interesting. I'm going to get these books and course, honestly. I'm not even a couples therapist, but I really want to, this is the most resonant thing I've heard in couples therapy discussions so far in terms of your model and the way I work. It feels right. Just the fact that the somatic aspect.
Yeah. And you can use it with individuals. You don't have to be working with couples to do relational work, right? We're all relational. We're all in relationship, whether it's to the relationship to our own narrative, our own past, our future, I think we're all doing relational work, regardless of how many people are sitting in the office.
Yes, I definitely do practice from a relational perspective and with individuals. And so thank you for saying that. So now I'm more definitely going to buy it, but I was going to anyway.
Well, you were saying, I cut you off. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off again. But I cut you off because you said that somatically it works for you because that's the integrative.
Yeah, because I practice somatically. And, when working with people, including the somatic perspective and sensory perspective into what is happening, bringing all of that in and, what's like here, what's present, what's in the collective, what's in the unconscious, what's in ancestral, stuff that's held in our bodies. And it's just feels really good to me to hear you bringing that language into what you're speaking about. Just feels right to my system. And that, I guess, that is actually a pretty good way to segue into. So how did you get into bringing psychedelic-assisted work into what you do in your relationship practice?
Well, I actually did the MAPS MDMA training first, with the assumption that MDMA was going to be legal this year. It's now going back. It's now going back to phase 3 trials, so it could be a while again. But MDMA was really created initially to do couples work, and it's a really powerful way for couples to work on issues because it's an empathogen. And so it decreases the anxiety, and it doesn't do anything in your brain that's not already there. Like it releases some dopamine and some serotonin. It just helps you look at your partner without that feeling of they're coming in to attack me. They want to hurt me. You look at your partner, you're like, they don't want to hurt me. They really do have my best interest at mind. And when you come from that perspective, you just can talk at a whole different level, right? Like the narrative changes. The narrative really does shift. And so I love that training. And then I shifted to getting trained in ketamine because ketamine's legal. And ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I think, is powerful because it has, been proven. MDMA and ketamine have both been proven as antidepressants and also as being really beneficial for people with PTSD. And I saw, thousands of tapes of people in sessions using ketamine and using MDMA first and then using ketamine. And I was just really amazed at the way that you could do ketamine sessions, and they were much quicker than MDMA. You come out of it after like an hour, hour and a half. You can do it for a couple hours, although I don't recommend it. And it's very dose related. So you could take a psycholytic dose where you just kind of feel nice in your body, but you still have languaging where you can use it in a session with a couple. Or you could do a psychedelic dose where each person goes into their own psychedelic experience, very internal, many times visual, many times insightful, where that narrative sort of, what it does in your brain is it creates memory reconsolidation. So it helps you to rearrange the narrative and like to pull the pieces out and put them back in different places, so that when you come out of it, you're like, wow, I understand my childhood a little bit differently, or I understand my spouse and why they did that. Like you just have a different view, and then you can process that with your partner. And going back to what we just talked about in the very beginning about intention, you get a powerful reminder that what you go in with as your intention sort of creates a lot of your narrative during the experience. I just find it fascinating. And the last thing I'll say about what it has taught me as a therapist is that we are not the privileged, like, shaman who's sitting out on the hill going, I will give you the answer if you pay me enough money and it's in my top drawer and only the few who can afford me will get it. Like, that's not what therapy is. Like, I really see that we are the guides that help people find their own internal wisdom. Like, everybody has their own inner wisdom, their own inner shaman, their own inner therapist. Like, people know what they need to heal, but we're there to help guide them to pull that out, like to help them find it and figure that out. That's been a total awakening for me in my career as a therapist.
Yeah. Isn't it beautiful to know that everyone has inside of them already what they need? And yeah, I think a lot of us go into the field because we want to fix and change other people, in our own lives or ourselves. But that's not that's not the beauty of therapy, is telling other people what to do and how to do it and being the expert. The beauty is the internal transformative process that people go through. And I think personally, I find it sad that new therapists who are coming out into the field, so many of them are being kind of indoctrinated to these behavioral approaches from school and thinking that that's the only way that symptom relief happens, rather than what transformative, deep, rich, huge, unbelievable growth can happen when you are able to go through a therapeutic process that really facilitates that. And they don't even know, they're not even learning that that's a possibility. I feel like I was in the later stages of where there was still a wisp of the art and the magic of what a therapeutic relationship and process can provide, but they really had us, marching in the evidence-based practice gold standard language at first, or when I first got out of school, till I saw how that actually didn't seem to fit the clients that I was working with, didn't really meet them where they were, or those models were so limited. So, yeah, it's beautiful to know that that is possible, and what a relief to take ourselves as experts out of it and just trust that the goodness is right there with you. The client that you're sitting with has what they need, and you can be there to play a part in it, not, do it to them. Because I know when I go to therapy, I don't want my therapist to think, oh, I'm going to fix you. I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with you, and then I'm going to fix it. Like, no. So, I'm curious about, with the psychedelic work and what you just described about memory reconsolidation. Myself, I haven't ever tried psychedelic-assisted therapy yet. I do want to, and I also want to get trained in it. But as a younger person, a very traumatized and attachment wounded young person with no awareness of that, I did experiment a lot with psychedelics when I was a teen and young adult. And mainly it was LSD and a little bit of psilocybin. I think I tried MDMA once. But I would have these profound awarenesses. Oftentimes it would be a lot of scary, overwhelming material that would be there first. And then at some point I would have some kind of huge, like, wow, I understand everything now. And then when it was over, and with LSD, it would last so long. It would be like, I would want it to be over long before it was over. Like, I just want to go to sleep. But the next day, it wasn't like I felt that a profound transformation had happened. I just was like, thank goodness I finally got to sleep. So, it's not just about what happens in the experience, but there's a lot more to the way that someone can have like a lasting transformative change through psychedelic assisted therapy. I know from my experience as just recreational user with all this unresolved, unknown trauma. So what can you tell us about maybe what people can expect if they do a psychedelic assisted relationship therapy experience in an intensive format, or if it's more of a, ongoing therapy format?
Well, what you're saying makes sense, because I don't think the ketamine therapy or any kind of psychedelic therapy works without integration. Like,
right.
Integrating the experience is where the change happens. So I'm more of a guide. I'm not your rescuer. I'm not here to like rescue you from any of your experiences. In fact, I might guide you to go a little deeper into those experiences that are uncomfortable. And then we talk about after the experience, usually days later, what was that like? What was your takeaway and what did you notice? And without any prompting from me about interpretation. I was an art therapist for a long time and I did Jungian therapy, and what you dreamed about or draw in your art therapy session has meaning for you. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for me. So me interpreting it takes away from you as your own inner wisdom is trying to tell you something. And it's the same with the psychedelic experience. So even going back to those childhood experiences, you can still integrate some of that work now, and it can be pretty powerful. One of the reasons it's so scary when you're young, particularly before your brain is fully formed, is because it's such a big download of information and we have nowhere to put it. And then you get up and eat Cheerios and go off to school the next morning. So the environment isn't, the setting is not safe to integrate the material. The set means your mindset, like, oh my God, we did in the parking lot of the 7-Eleven and then everybody went home and I was stuck by myself. And like, that's not a great setting to do psychedelics. You need the mindset of I'm safe. This is going to be important work. I have people around me that are going to hold the container. And in a couple days or even that night, I can talk to somebody about it. I can journal, like it's a much different grown-up way of doing it.
None of it was like that.
No, I know, because I did the same thing as a teenager, and I did mescaline and LSD and mushrooms. And interestingly, some of the really traumatic things that happened to me in like what you would call, a really challenging trip or journey, when I did it again as an adult in a totally different setting, in a more ritual setting with people that were supporting me, that experience turned out to be somewhat prophetic. Like it was almost like back then when I was 15 or 16 or 17, however old I was, I had that experience that actually came true 30 years later. And I was like, wow, there was a lot of important information there that of course made no sense at the time because it wasn't even relevant for that decade. It was only relevant in my life decades later. And I was able to understand it because my brain and my life had evolved to be able to interpret the narrative of what that meant. And when that happened, I felt like, first I felt like, time's irrelevant. Secondly, I felt like, my brain gave me that information. It's so fascinating. So psychedelics kind of open your brain to information that then you can interpret to help you. I'm not interpreting it, but you're interpreting it. So I'll give you one quick example. Like I just came back from a ketamine couples retreat. It's a cultivating joy and intimacy. And we had, I was a guide. I was the therapist. And one of the people in the retreat, she said she had never even had a second glass of wine, like never smoked pot, never done psychedelics, never done any drugs at all, barely took Advil, like didn't like to take Tylenol, was never on an antidepressant, didn't take diabetes medication or cholesterol, like really never taken anything. And she did the ketamine 3 times. We do it in the morning. By the end, she was like, why have I been wasting my whole life? Like, I can't believe I wasted decades not doing this. This is amazing. So as much as people can be scared of the experience, it also can be like this mind-opening, joyful doorway into a whole nother part of the self. And it's the parts of us that we get scared of. It's not like it's bringing you to somewhere that doesn't exist. It's bringing you into you. And so that's why it's scary, because we don't understand. We don't have a way to interpret it, but it's bringing us into us. And that's why it's helpful in couples, because then the couple, when they share those things with each other, they have what I call, into me see, this form of intimacy that is, ranging through their psyche and their unconscious that's really deep and connecting. And when they do it with the intention of working on their relationship, it can be incredibly powerful. So for her, she said for weeks afterwards, and there is a window neurologically, 3 weeks to 3 months after the experience, she said like she wasn't annoyed with her partner. They were getting along. They didn't snap at each other. Like there was a new level of connection. They started having sex again. Like there's a whole shift that happens. It starts to wear off like any good retreat, overflow starts to wear off. But something does shift in the plasticity of your brain for quite a while after the ketamine experience.
I appreciate what you shared. And, it reflected to me thinking about those experiences that I had when I was younger, that it's not that I was confronting trauma material. What it was for me is it just came right back when you were saying it. What it was how afraid I was in life, I think, and how mistrustful I felt about everyone in my life. And so it was, what you're saying about that material being informative to one's life. I wasn't ready to, I was just trying to survive my life at that time. I wasn't ready to see how afraid I was and how alone I felt. And I think that's what it really tapped into. So it didn't show me traumatic experiences. I wasn't having like flashbacks, reliving things or seeing like scary demons or something. It was more just like this feel of, I do not feel safe and I don't trust these people. I can't trust these people. I find it kind of funny that I did it like so many times during this. Like, why would I keep doing it? But I did have other aspects of, like I said, of the experience that were like, that would keep being shown to me each time I would do it. Like, just different things that wouldn't be relevant for anybody who's listening to hear. But, they are things that are meaningful about my experience. And, but that, I really want to emphasize again, integrative seems to be the operative word for our conversation, how important the integration aspect of the work is too, because otherwise it just, it's fragmented, like me remembering mainly the fact that it was really scary and being like, well, what about that?
But
Tammy,
can I just say,
yeah.
The fact that you kept going back in, it's almost as if you were resourcing yourself. Like, I'm going to go back in because I know that there's a part of me that knows how to deal with this. There's a part of me that knows how to deal with this aloneness and this fear. And I'm going to go back in because I'm finding that part of myself that knows how to deal with this aloneness and this fear. You were like continuing to resource. You were doing it on your own. When you were saying, I'm going to go back in, I'm going to open the closet door, I'm going to look under the bed, I'm going to go to those places, those scary, lonely places. And look what you're doing now for your career. You know what I mean? Like it almost trained you to like go to the scary places with people, to look in the closet, to go under the bed, to not be afraid that you might be alone in the world doing this, to not be afraid of your aloneness, to not be afraid of not feeling safe. Like you research yourself enough to know that maybe this is your path. And it doesn't have to be what you're afraid of. It can be the thing that saves you. Like that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. I wish I could talk to you for another hour or 5 hours about this, but I know we have to wrap up for now. And I'm just so grateful that that now I really know what you're doing and that you're doing this and that you're teaching about it so that others can use your model and maybe others will be inspired with the way you're practicing with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy too. But just thank you so much for spending some time with me today here on Therapy Chat.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Oh, you can come back. Yeah, we'll make that happen. Wonderful. So, before I let you go, can you just tell everybody where can they find all these amazing things that you do? I will have a link to your PESI training in the show notes, but where can people find you?
Well, to find more of me and my books, you can go to drtammynelson.com. It's drtammynelson.com. You can go to istitraining.com, ISTI, which stands for Integrative Sex Therapy Institute, or you can just go to integrativesextherapyinstitute.com, and you'll find the Integrative Relationship Therapy. You'll find how to be a certified sex and couples therapist or an ASEX certified sex therapist. There's all kinds of trainings there. And you don't have to sign up for a whole training. You can just take a course, whether it's downloadable or a live course. I have live courses coming up too. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have about any trainings or courses.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. Thank you. I'll put all those links in the show notes and we will stay connected. But for now, thank you so much for being my guest today on Therapy Chat.
Thanks, Laura. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, lcsw-c. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.